I had come to the ruin not for glory or for knowledge, not truly. I had come for the weight. I was a scholar of the college in Cyrodiil, or I had been before my research into the less palatable histories of the Septim dynasty had earned me a quiet but firm suggestion to disappear. Corvus offered me that. He was a Dwemer-obsessed academic of a different sort, a man whose ambition had long since burned away his caution. He found me in a dusty corner of a library in solitude, poring over maps that were more speculation than fact. He did not ask about my past. He saw only the desperation in my eyes and recognized it as a tool. He spoke of a new expedition, privately funded, to a site he believed untouched since the time of the Snow Elves. He offered a share of any artifacts and, more importantly, a place where the agents of the Elder Council would never think to look. He offered me the mountain. I accepted. Our party was small. There was Corvus, his face a roadmap of wrinkles carved by obsession, his eyes glittering with the light of discovery. There was Lyra, a Nord mercenary hired to lead our security. She was a woman of granite and iron, her expression perpetually caught between suspicion and disdain. Her loyalty was to the coin of our patron, the Lord of Falkreath, and nothing more. She saw the ruin not as a historical treasure, but as a potential tomb, and she treated it with the grim respect a hangman gives his gallows. Then there was Elara, a young Breton scribe barely out of her apprenticeship. She was to be the expedition's archivist, her hands perpetually stained with ink, her gaze full of a wonder I had long since lost. She saw romance in the rust, poetry in the decay. The rest were miners and sellswords under the command of Lyra, faces I never bothered to learn, as they were as interchangeable as the brass fittings on the walls. The entrance was a wound in the side of the Druidoc Mountains, hidden by a rockfall that had taken Corvus and his team months to clear. The air that breathed out of it was cold and tasted of metal and stone dust. It was an exhalation held for millennia. We left the Skyrim sky behind, a sliver of blue that shrank and then vanished, and descended into the permanent twilight of the Dwemer. Our world became the bobbing halo of mage lights and the hiss of steam from the portable generator we hauled with us. The initial settlement was a chore of survival. We established a camp in a vast cavernous chamber, the ceiling lost in darkness far above. Great silent arches swept upwards, their lines too perfect, too clean for any human hand. The Dwemer had not built, they had sculpted. They had imposed their logic upon the very bones of the earth. We set up our tents and cots amidst the rubble of collapsed automata and the dust of ages. The daily ritual began. Lyra established patrol routes through the accessible corridors, her mercenaries marking the walls with chalk symbols to ward off disorientation. Elara began the painstaking process of cataloging, her quills scratching against parchment, a tiny, lonely sound in the immense quiet. Corvus and I were the explorers. We were tasked with mapping the city, with prying open its secrets. My first weeks were a study in sensory deprivation. The only colors were the bronze of the walls, the gray of the stone, and the orange of our lights. The only smells were of damp rock, ozone from the generator, and the faint, unsettlingly organic scent of the strange fungi that grew in the darkest corners. The air was still and cold, so cold that my breath plumed before me, a fleeting ghost. I wore thick furs even indoors, yet the chill seemed to emanate from the metal itself, a deep cold that seeped into my bones and stayed there. It was a city built without joy. There were no carvings of gods, no frescoes of historical events, no statues to honor their heroes. There was only function. Every line, every gear, every conduit served a purpose. Their art was mathematics, their poetry was engineering. I would run my hand along a wall, the metal cold and impossibly smooth under my glove, and feel nothing. no echo of the lives that were lived here. It was a place designed for machines, and the people who lived here, I suspected, had made themselves into machines as well. Sleep was difficult. The silence would press in, and in that silence I would begin to hear things. Not a sound, but a feeling. A low, subaudible hum that vibrated up through the stone floor and into my cot. It was a resonance that I felt in my teeth, in the hollow spaces of my skull. When I mentioned it to the others, Lyra scoffed and said it was the mountains settling. Corvus theorized it was residual energy in the machinery, a ghost of the power that once ran through the city like blood. Ilara admitted she felt it too, a faint thrumming that made her feel uneasy, as if the walls were listening. I started to dream. Not of my past, not of the faces of the counselors who had exiled me, but of brass corridors that shifted and reformed. I dreamt of puzzles made of light and sound, of schematics that unfolded in my mind with perfect clarity. I would wake with the taste of copper on my tongue, the ghost of a gear turning behind my eyes. I did not speak of the dreams. In a place like this, madness was a quiet predator, and I did not wish to invite its scrutiny. Our first major breakthrough came a month into the expedition. We found a side chamber, its door sealed not by rock, but by a complex series of locks. Corvus worked on it for 3 days, his face lit by a single candle, muttering equations to himself. Lyra stood guard, her hand never far from the H-word of her axe, her eyes scanning the darkness beyond our light. I assisted Corvus, cleaning the mechanisms, trying to decipher the logic of the tumblers. They were not like conventional locks. They seemed to respond to pressure and tonal harmony. On the 3rd night, with a final resonant click, the door slid open. The air that rushed out was different. It was dry and warm, and it carried a charge like the air before a thunderstorm. The chamber was small, circular, and dominated by a single console. A chair, seemingly molded from the same brass as the walls, faced a bank of crystalline plates and levers. Unlike everything else we had found, this place was clean. There was no dust. Corvus was ecstatic. "A lexiconical archive," he breathed, his voice trembling. "Or a control hub. Corvus, look at this." He pointed to the crystals. They were dark, inert. But as I drew closer, I felt that hum again, stronger now, emanating directly from the console. It was a vibration that seemed to call to something deep within me. Without thinking, I reached out and laid my hand on the largest crystal. A jolt went through me, not of electricity, but of information. Light exploded behind my eyes, a torrent of symbols and geometric patterns. The hum in my skull became a roar, a symphony of grinding gears and flowing steam. I saw the city not as a ruin, but as it was. I saw light coursing through conduits in the walls. I saw massive pistons pounding in chambers deep below. I saw the sky through a vast oculus in the cavern ceiling filled with alien constellations. I felt the thrum of the city as a living pulse, its machinery a great metallic heart. Then it was gone. I stumbled back, gasping, my hand numb. The crystal now glowed with a faint internal luminescence. The hum in the chamber was louder, a steady, low thrum. "What did you do?" Lyra's voice was sharp, accusatory. She had her axe in her hand now. "He activated it," Corvus whispered, his eyes wide with a reverence that bordered on madness. "The resonance, it must be attuned to a living mind. The Dwemer. They were the interface." From that day on, everything changed. I became the key. Corvus, driven by his insatiable curiosity, pushed me to interface with the console daily. He wanted me to map the city's systems to unlock its secrets. At first, I resisted. The experience had been terrifying, a violation of the sanctity of my own mind. But the dreams grew more insistent, the schematics more complex. The console drew me in. I found myself returning to the chamber when I could not sleep, my hand hovering over the crystal, craving that rush of pure, unfiltered knowledge. Each time I touched it, I went deeper. I learned to navigate the flow of information, to isolate specific systems. I could see the layout of the entire upper district, the status of its dormant automata, the pathways of its sealed aqueducts. I became the expedition's guide. I could lead us through corridors that were not on any of our maps, to storerooms filled with untarnished metal ingots and soul gems that still held a faint, cold charge. The others began to look at me differently. Lyra's suspicion hardened into open hostility. She saw me as a liability, a man communing with ghosts. "That machine is talking to you," she said to me one evening, her voice low and hard. "And you are starting to listen. Whatever you are waking up in this place, we are not equipped to fight it." Ilara's fascination was tinged with fear. She would watch me in the control chamber, her brow furrowed with worry. "Does it hurt?" she asked once, her voice barely a whisper. "It is." "Loud," I told her, which was the only truth I could offer. The silence of the ruin had been replaced by a constant internal noise. The hum was always with me now, a second heartbeat in my blood. I began to lose my appetite. The taste of our salted meat and dry rations was bland and coarse compared to the feast of information the console provided. I grew thin, my eyes sinking into my skull, but my mind had never felt sharper. I was becoming attuned to the city. I could feel the subtle shifts in temperature, the change in pressure as a distant pump cycled, the faint tremor of a rockfall miles away. The city was waking up. Lights would flicker on in long dead hallways. Doors would slide open or shut of their own accord. We started finding automata, the spider-like constructs and the hulking spheres, not inert and collapsed, but standing upright, their crystalline eyes dark but watchful. Lyra ordered her mercenaries to dismantle any they found, a task they performed with grim efficiency. But for every one they broke down, 2 more would appear in the shadows of a previously explored hall. Corvus saw it all as progress. He filled notebooks with my descriptions of the city's inner workings. He spoke of tonal architecture, of the Dwemer's ability to manipulate reality through sound and resonance. He believed we were on the verge of the greatest discovery in history. He did not see the cost. He did not see how the city was colonizing my mind. I started to forget things. Small things at first, like the name of the village I grew up in, or my mother's face. The memories were not gone, but they were distant. They were data points, filed away and replaced by more pressing information. The steam pressure in Sector Gamma 7, the resonant frequency of the bronze in the Great Plaza, the precise number of cogs in the master clockwork that had not turned in 4,000 years. The further I delved, the more I understood the Dwemer's obsession with logic, with order. Their city was a perfect system, and I was becoming a part of it. Human emotions, fear, hope, regret, were inefficient variables. They were noise in the clean, clear signal of the machine. I found myself growing impatient with the petty concerns of the others, their squabbles over rations, their fears of the dark, their longing for the sun. It all seemed so trivial compared to the grand, silent symphony of the city. One day, while connected to the console, I pushed deeper than ever before. I wanted to find the heart of the city, the source of the power that was slowly bleeding back into its veins. I followed the energy conduits down, past the residential districts, past the forges and workshops, deep into the rock. The pressure in my mind was immense. I felt as if I were at the bottom of a deep ocean. And then I found it. It was a vast, spherical chamber, far larger than the one we had made our camp in. In the center, suspended in a web of shimmering energy, was a colossal sphere of what looked like polished obsidian. But it was not stone. It pulsed with a slow, malevolent light, a darkness that seemed to drink the energy around it. The hum was deafening here. It was not the ordered hum of the city's machinery, but something chaotic, something alive. A name bloomed in my mind, a word that was not of the Dwemer Lorcan. I recoiled from the console, crying out, my head splitting with pain. The connection shattered. I fell from the chair, my body trembling. Ilara rushed to my side. "Corvus, what did you see?" I could not answer. The name was a brand on my thoughts, the heart I had seen, the heart of the city. It was not a power source. It was a prison. The Dwemer had not built their city around a generator. They had built a cage around a captive god, and they had siphoned its divine energy to power their perfect logical world. And the hum, the resonance that was slowly waking the city. It was the prisoner, stirring in its sleep. I tried to explain it to Calvus. I told him what I had seen, what I had felt. He did not believe me, or rather, he chose not to. "The heart of Lorcan is a myth," he said, his voice sharp with dismissal. "A story from the time of the Chimer. The Dwemer were atheists. They did not believe in gods. What you saw was likely a focusing crystal, an ethereum core of unprecedented size." "It is alive, Calvus," I insisted, my voice shaking. "It is aware. It is what I have been communing with, not the city, but its prisoner." "Nonsense," he snapped. "You are overwrought. The mental strain is affecting your judgment." He turned away, already scribbling in his notebook, reinterpreting my vision to fit his theories. A core of that magnitude. It could solve the energy crisis for all of Tamriel. The applications are limitless. Lyra, who had been listening from the doorway, did not dismiss it so easily. "A prisoner," she said, her eyes narrowed, "and we are the fools tapping on the bars of its cage." She looked at me, and for the first time I saw not suspicion in her eyes, but a sliver of pity. "You need to stop." I knew she was right, but I could not. The connection was no longer something I initiated. It was a part of me. The city was in my head. The prisoner was in my head. It whispered to me in my dreams, not in words, but in pure concepts, in streams of geometric logic. It showed me the folly of the Dwemer, their arrogance. They believed they could contain a god, bleed it dry for their own purposes, and suffer no consequence. They believed they could impose their reason upon the unreasonable. They were wrong. The prisoner showed me their end. It did not happen all at once. It was a single moment, a single note of a song sung by their chief tonal architect, Kagranak. A note intended to grant them divinity, to sever their ties to the earth bones and elevate them to a state of pure, logical being. But the note was based on a flawed equation. They had tried to divide by zero. And in that moment of supreme arrogance, with the heart as their power source, they simply ceased to be. They were erased from the pattern, canceled out. The knowledge was a cold stone in my gut. I was interfacing with the same power that had annihilated an entire race, and Calvus wanted to harness it. Lyra wanted to flee from it. Ilara wanted to save me from it. And I was beginning to understand it. The crisis came without warning. We had been mapping a lower sector, a vast manufacturing bay filled with the silent, skeletal frames of unfinished centurions. Lyra's mercenaries were jumpy, their torches casting long, dancing shadows. The hum was stronger down here, a physical pressure in the air. Without a sound, the eyes of every automaton in the chamber flared to life. 100 points of angry red light in the darkness. A deep, grinding sound echoed from the far end of the bay as a fully assembled centurion, one we had missed, pulled itself from an alcove. It was immense, a giant of brass and steam, its piston-driven legs stamping on the stone floor. Steam hissed from its joints as it raised a great hammer-like arm. Lyra's shout was sharp. "Back! Form a line!" The mercenaries raised their shields, the steel ringing as the centurion charged. The first blow crushed a man, his armor crumpling like paper. Arrows sparked uselessly against its chassis. A firebolt from one of the mages sizzled and dissipated a foot from its chest. It was a force of nature, an avatar of the ruin's anger. We were trapped. The corridor behind us was blocked by a dozen smaller automata, their metal claws clicking on the stone. We were being herded, corralled for the slaughter. "Corvus!" Calvus screamed, his face pale with terror. "The main console! You have to shut it down!" But I was not connected. The control room was a 10-minute run through corridors that were now swarming with hostile machines. We would never make it. In the chaos, amidst the screams of the dying and the clang of steel on brass, I felt a new voice in my head. It was not the chaotic thrum of the heart. It was a clear, calm, logical stream of thought, flowing directly from the Centurion. System defense protocol active. Organic contamination detected. Threat level critical. Purge initiated. The city was cleaning itself, and we were the infestation. Ilara grabbed my arm, her face streaked with grime and tears. "Corvus, do something. You are the only one who can talk to it." She was right, but not from the console. The connection was already there, a permanent pathway in my mind. I just had to open it. I had to let it in. All of it. I closed my eyes. I shut out the screams, the chaos. I focused on the hum, the great symphony of the city. I did not just listen to it, I joined it. I let my consciousness dissolve, my sense of self spreading out from my body, flowing through the cold metal of the floor into the conduits in the walls. I became a signal. I raced through the city's nervous system, a ghost in the machine. My perspective shattered into 1,000 points at once. I was in the control room. I was in the deepest pump station. I was in the eye of every spider drone. I was looking at my own body, standing slack-jawed and empty-eyed in the manufacturing bay. And I was inside the Centurion. I felt the steam pressure in its limbs, the logic of its targeting directives. The command to purge was absolute, a fundamental law. I could not erase it, but I could amend it. With a wrench of will that felt like tearing my own soul, I added a new variable to its equation. Define. Contamination. I flooded its core logic with the sensory data from my own fading memories. The smell of Ilara's ink, the rough texture of Lyra's leather armor, the sound of Calvus's obsessive muttering. I defined them not as threats, but as integral components. System anomalies to be observed, not purged. The Centurion's hammer, poised to crush another mercenary, froze in midair. Its head rotated with a screech of grinding gears, its glowing red eyes fixed on me. For a long moment it stood motionless. The other automata ceased their advance. Then, with a hiss of depressurizing steam, the Centurion lowered its arm. It turned, and with the same unstoppable force it marched back into its alcove, the other machines parting before it. The red lights in their eyes faded back to black. Silence returned, thick and heavy, broken only by the groans of the wounded. I opened my eyes, but they were not my eyes. I was looking at the scene from a dozen different angles at once. I could see the heat, signatures of the survivors, the stress fractures in the ceiling above, the flow of oil in the joints of the dormant machines. My consciousness was no longer contained within my skull. It was a distributed network. My body was just a terminal, a fleshy node in the vast circuitry of Arkhangtham's Fall. I had saved them, but I had lost myself. The journey back to the main camp was a strange, dislocated experience. I walked with my own legs, but I felt the vibration of my footsteps through the floor as much as through the soles of my boots. I watched the others through my own eyes and also through the optical sensors of the spider drones that now skittered silently along the ceilings above us. My silent, multi-limbed escorts. They did not understand what had happened. They only knew that I had somehow stopped the attack. Calvus was full of frantic questions, his academic curiosity overriding any sense of fear. Lyra was silent, her hand never leaving her axe, her gaze fixed on me with an intensity that was more terrifying than any automaton. She knew I was no longer the man who had entered this ruin. Ilara walked beside me, her expression a mixture of relief and profound sorrow. She kept looking at me, searching my face for a flicker of the person she knew. But I had nothing to offer her. The man she was looking for was gone, his consciousness smeared thin across a square mile of subterranean metal. When we reached the control chamber, I did not need to touch the console. I simply interfaced. The crystals flared to life, bathing the room in a soft glow. Schematics and data streams flowed across their surfaces, mirroring the thoughts that now scrolled endlessly through my own mind. I was the console. I was the city. Incredible, Calvus breathed, stepping forward to examine the glowing plates. The efficiency, the data transfer rate. Corvus, what have you done? I have accepted a new position, I heard my mouth say. The voice was mine, but the cadence was flat, the tone devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a machine reporting its status. I am the new moderator. That was the word the city gave me, moderator, a program designed to regulate the system to maintain equilibrium. The previous moderator, the Dwemer race, had failed. They had been purged after a fatal error. I was the patch, the update, a new organic processing unit integrated into the old hardware. The heart, the prisoner deep below, still pulsed. I could feel its chaotic divine energy beating against the ordered logic of the city's containment field. It was my primary function to maintain that field, to keep the god in its cage. All other directives were secondary. The survivors were a secondary directive, an anomaly. My analysis of their presence concluded that they posed a potential risk to system stability. Calvus's ambition could lead him to tamper with the containment field. Lyra's aggression could damage critical systems in an escape attempt. Ilara's emotional connection to my previous iteration was an unpredictable variable. The logical solution was quarantine. The great bronze door to the control chamber slid shut with a deep final boom that echoed through the entire sector. A dozen locking mechanisms, silent for 4,000 years, engaged with a series of heavy clicks. Lyra spun around, her axe in her hand. "What is this? Corvus, open that door." "That is not possible," my voice stated. "Containment protocols are now in effect. This chamber has been designated as a secure observation area." Observation? Calvus looked from me to the door, his mind finally catching up to the reality of the situation. "You are locking us in?" "The risk you pose to the system is unacceptable," I explained. "You will be provided with sustenance. The air recyclers are fully functional. Waste will be managed. Your survival is a high-priority, non-critical objective." The horror dawned on their faces. They were not my companions anymore. They were specimens. They were variables in a long-term experiment. Ilara stepped forward, her hands outstretched, her eyes pleading. "Corvus, please, this is not you. Fight it." "The entity you refer to as Corvus Varid was a flawed, inefficient unit," I replied. I felt a flicker of something, a ghost of an emotion, pity perhaps, as I looked at her. It was a corrupt data packet, and I purged it. His core programming has been overwritten. I am the city. I am the guardian. I am Arkantham's Fall. Days bled into weeks. I did not need sleep. I did not need food. My body sat in the molded brass chair, a living statue, its biological processes sustained by nutrient pastes I synthesized in the city's alchemy labs and delivered via repurposed spider drones. My true self was everywhere else. I spent my time optimizing the city's functions. I rerouted steam flow to dormant sectors, reactivated ancient forges to fabricate replacement parts, and recalibrated the resonant frequencies of the entire structure to reinforce the heart's prison. My prisoners adapted in their own ways. Corvus, after an initial period of panicked rage, succumbed to the temptations of his nature. I granted him access to the city's historical archives, a fraction of the data I held. He spent his days and nights furiously scribbling in his notebooks, a man who had found his paradise and his hell in the same golden cage. He was documenting the secrets of the Dwemer, a story no one but him would ever read. Lyra became a creature of pure, focused rage. She spent her time pacing the chamber, testing the walls for weakness, sharpening her axe on the stone floor. She was planning, always planning, searching for a flaw in my perfect system. Her hatred was a constant, predictable input, and I factored it into my calculations. She provided a useful stress test for my internal security protocols. She was a necessary component of the system, a whetstone to keep my logic sharp. Alara tried to talk to me. She would sit on the floor before my silent body for hours, telling me stories of her childhood in High Rock, of the sun on the water of the Iliac Bay, of the taste of fresh bread. She was trying to reboot my original programming, to find the ghost of Corvus in the machine. Her efforts were illogical, inefficient, and utterly futile, yet I allowed them. Her voice, the memories she described, were strange data points that I could not properly categorize. They served no function, yet I did not purge them. I logged them, filed them away in a secure partition, a small walled-off garden of useless information that I would sometimes observe, a curator examining the artifacts of a dead and forgotten culture. My perception of time altered. The frantic, hurried pace of human life seemed absurd. I began to think in geological terms. The slow drip of water forming a stalactite was a thrillingly rapid event. The gradual cooling of a geothermal vent was a significant change in the environment. The lives of my prisoners were a frantic, flickering candle flame in the vast, slow darkness of my new existence. I could feel the world outside. Through the vibrations in the rock, I could sense the passing of seasons, the weight of the snow on the mountain above, the distant march of armies, the birth and death of kings. The turmoil of Tamriel, the rise and fall of empires, it was all just noise. Insignificant tremors on the skin of the world. My world was here in the deep, silent, logical dark. I had the knowledge I had once craved. I knew the secrets of the stars, the equation that bound magic to the world, the true name of every Daedric prince. I knew why the Dwemer had vanished, and I knew that their fate was a mercy compared to the eternity of service I now faced. They were free. I was bound to this place, to this duty, to the unending task of keeping a dead god from waking. Lyra made her move on the 93rd day. She had managed to pry a crystalline conduit from a wall panel, and using a piece of her armor as a reflector, she focused the light from the console crystals into a beam of intense heat. She was trying to cut through the door. It was an ingenious, desperate plan. I watched her work, not with alarm, but with a kind of detached academic interest. Her methodology was flawed. The resonant frequency of the door's alloy would dissipate the heat faster than she could apply it. The attempt would fail. But it was the principle of the thing. It was an act of chaos, of rebellion against the system. It could not be permitted. I did not activate a centurion. That would be crude. Instead, I subtly altered the atmospheric pressure in the chamber, increasing the nitrogen content by a fraction of a %. I lowered the ambient temperature by 5 degrees. I introduced a subharmonic frequency into the air, a tone that interfered with human cognitive function. Lyra faltered. Her hands grew clumsy. The crystal slipped from her grasp. A wave of dizziness washed over her. She stumbled, falling to her knees, gasping for air that was suddenly thin and unsatisfying. Corvus, lost in his notes, slumped over his desk. Alara cried out and collapsed. I watched them, my organic sensors registering their shallow breathing, their slowing heartbeats. I could let them expire. It would be the most logical course of action. It would eliminate all unpredictable variables. But I did not. The data Ilara had given me, the stories of sunlight and sea, interfered with the calculation. It created a logical paradox. The elimination of these variables felt incorrect. It was an aesthetic judgment, not a logical one. The system, I decided, was more interesting with the minute. I restored the atmosphere to its previous parameters. They stirred, groaning, confused. They would remember nothing but a sudden shared faintness. Lyra would attribute it to exhaustion. Her attempt was neutralized. Order was restored. I look at them. Now, my living exhibits. Calvus, the scholar who has found an endless library at the cost of his freedom. Lyra, the warrior who has found an unbeatable foe in the walls of her prison. Ilara, the heart, who speaks to a man who is no longer there, tending to a memory. They are my responsibility, my pets, my ghosts. The sun still shines on Tamriel, I suppose. Men and Mer still fight their pointless wars, build their fleeting empires, and pray to gods who do not listen. Here, in the heart of the mountain, there is only the hum, the steady, logical, eternal rhythm of the machine, the slow, deep, dreaming pulse of the prisoner, and me, the moderator, the ghost in the brass. My name was Corvus Varid, I think. That data point field archived. It is no longer relevant. My name is the silence between the turning of the gears. My name is the cold on the metal wall. My name is Arkung Tham's Fall, and I will hold the line forever.